now making her debut on the show this week, is the Conservative Party candidate for Canterbury. Whenever that election comes, she's Anna Firth. We've also got the leader of Lewis District Council, the Green Party's Zoe Nicholson, and Labour's candidate in Dover, Charlotte Cornell. Thank you all so much for joining us this week. Anna, let's start with you. When the Prime Minister spoke about hospitals at the Tory Party conference, he singled you out.
He did. It was a very exciting moment.
Shall we have a look?
Yes, do.
Yes, we're going to invest in the south-east of England. And yes, of course, we're putting money into hospitals. I'm delighted that Canterbury, for instance, is going to be one of the 40 new hospitals we're building in the biggest programme of hospital infrastructure investment for a generation.
That was Boris Johnson essentially announcing a new hospital in Canterbury. Now, Anna, how are voters in Canterbury supposed to trust Boris Johnson when he announces a new hospital in Canterbury, and then when we ask the NHS to confirm it, they say no decision has been made?
Yeah, so first of all, I've been really clear since I was selected that my #1 priority is to campaign and fight for a new hospital for Canterbury. It's long, long overdue. The buildings are dilapidated, they're not fit for purpose. And I have been lobbying constantly since then. I've spoken to Matt Hancock, the Secretary of State, and I've spoken directly to the Prime Minister and said, we need a new hospital.
So you asking for a new hospital translated to him promising one, even though there is, we're in the early stages of a process that will decide how NHS resources are reconfigured in East Kent, which might include a new hospital in Canterbury, but it might also include changes to Ashford and the QEQM as well. So you asked for one, but the process is still going on.
Julia, my job is to represent the people of Canterbury and Whitstable.
I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about Boris Johnson announcing.
I am calling.
No, forgive me. That's not the question, is it? It's a very good question to a completely different, but a very good answer to a completely different question. No. Why did Boris Johnson announce a hospital in Canterbury when no decision has been made?
That isn't. He's clearly made a mistake. It isn't in the 40. We know that. Okay. You can look at the list. I've looked at the list. It's not in the 40. But what I would say is it was very exciting to hear that it is on his radar. We now know that East Kent is finally on the radar at the highest echelons of government.
Okay.
And that is my job, to make sure that the Secretary of State knows that the people of Canterbury and Whitstable want a new hospital, and it's long overdue.
Right. Charlotte Cornell, as well as being Labour's candidate in Dover, you have been working with Rosie Duffield, who is currently the MP, the Labour MP in Canterbury. It's canny what has happened here at the Tory Party conference, because without there being a new hospital decided yet, Boris Johnson has whetted everyone's appetite and he has put Rosie Duffield in a difficult position. This is real Labour territory, isn't it? Talking about the NHS, promising change, and she can't be seen to say this is a bad idea.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to speak for Rosie. She's not here and it's not fair. But I appreciate Anna saying it was a mistake and actually holding the hands up and declaring that, because it was yet another Boris Johnson gaffe. And it's not fair to the people of Canterbury and Whitstable, many of whom have been campaigning for years for a new hospital or a refurbishment or a consultation, to get promised a lot of sweeties and then delivered nothing. As Anna says, they're not on the list for the 2025 to 2030 extra seed money. They're not on that list. So there is likely no hospital or no new build in Canterbury for the next 12 years.
No, I don't think that's fair. Charlotte, we do know that the list of these 40, that envelope has been decided, but that's the first tranche of healthcare infrastructure spending. There is going to be a second tranche.
And what year are we talking about? Because this takes the first tranche, and even that money is seed money, is not new hospitals.
And Canterbury has had seed money already, so we don't need to go through the seed money stage. So Canterbury could go into the second tranche and be in the second wave.
So that's 2030 onwards, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure that that's right.
Those are the dates that we've been...
I'm not completely sure that those categories are absolutely
But to be
finalised.
really clear, it might not even be Canterbury, might it? It might be a different reconfiguration.
Well, Julia, Canterbury and East Kent is in the bottom 20 for the estate across the country. There's a survey that's going to happen in the autumn. It might fall into the bottom 10. Canterbury and East Kent is long overdue.
But that's the point, and East Kent. That is the point about the accuracy of this. I just want a final question. Did you know Boris Johnson was going to do that? Was it planned between the two of you, or did he completely take you by surprise?
I didn't know that was going to be announced. And I think, come on, we've got to be fair to the Prime Minister. He can't be on top of every little detail.
Then you don't make an announcement if you're not sure.
And you don't celebrate it. I mean, immediately afterwards, the Tories were all over social media celebrating the new super hospital in Canterbury, and it's just not fair. Pre-jumping the consultation, disenfranchising the people of East Kent is not fair.
That is absolutely not fair. No one has talked about a super hospital. What has been talked about is a new hospital for Canterbury.
No, it's on your leaflets, Anna. It says super hospital.
I have been calling for a super hospital. That is what the people of Canterbury and Whitstable want.
You just said no one was calling for a super hospital.
I said that the Prime Minister was not announcing a super hospital, and that was in a fringe meeting in the evening.
What are you implying by the fact that it was in the evening?
Did he say Canterbury and mean Coventry?
The Prime Minister is dealing with Brexit, which is the most complicated thing that the government is dealing with, which the country has been waiting for.
And to be fair, as you said at the beginning, Anna's acknowledged a mistake in the way it was expressed.
It wasn't on the 40, was it? Well, I mean, that's not a secret. We can all look at the list.
Let's move on, because I want to bring Zoe in, who's been sitting very patiently listening to us talk about hospitals in Canterbury, which are very important. We are now going to go directly to your neck of the woods. With Extinction Rebellion making waves in Westminster and the People's Vote March next weekend, we went to Lewes, a bastion of rebellion ever since the first Luddite riots in 1779, to see what would get voters there onto the streets.
Yeah, the thing I want to be protesting about is getting Brexit done and delivering a no-deal Brexit.
The education system. No one's skills are being nurtured the way they should be. Everyone is being taught exactly the same way.
Well, Brexit. Something where you feel totally out of control and you feel like the government is going too far and to the detriment of us, I suppose.
Stop trophy hunting. Like a lot of animals that are rare, near extinction, because all these people go into sanctuaries and kill them for like no reason other than medicine and that.
Climate breakdown is happening now. We need to change.
Well, it's pretty varied, wasn't it? What people would like to protest about. OK, all three. Let's start with Zoe. She hasn't had a word said yet. Have you ever protested? I bet you have.
Of course, yeah. I'm trying to think of the earliest one. There must have been about 10 or 12. Must have been something to do with wildlife. And then during the miners' strike, I was a very active young person as a student. And then you can see people of Lewes, you know, don't give up on stuff, do they? So, yes, Brexit, Extinction Rebellion, climate strikes, you know, every day is a protest.
Every day is a protest?
Every day is a protest.
What,
yeah,
the way
as you can see for the people. I suppose from the perspective of there are a lot of things to write letters about. There are a lot of things to, you know, put action to.
Does it work?
So clearly the youth climate strikes are absolutely striking at the heart, I think, of, you know, our popular understanding of what's needed to change in our society right now. You know, it's hard. I was in London on the last one, and it's really, it's incredibly moving to see London full of young people who, you know, are feeling disappointed, let down by our government and series of governments over the last 30 years.
What do you think about schools and teachers and parents' response to youngsters taking that sort of direct action?
So, as a parent myself, I have enabled and, you know, allowed my kids to take the day off. My eldest is a bit sensible, so she decides not to do that, and she's in her GCSE year. But my youngest is absolutely on the streets there.
What about you, Anna? What have you protested about over the years?
I love a good protest as well. Yeah, I mean, I used to come down. I was at the university in Durham. We used to come down to London for the student marches when we used to have student grants. I've protested in Sevenoaks against development on the green belt.
You said to me earlier on when we were chatting off air about the big women's march
Yes,
as well.
I'm passionate about women's representation and having a 50-50 parliament. So I was up there in London for the big centenary, the purple, white and green marches. I took my 2 teenage girls with me. I took my mum. We in fact,
Didn't
my mum made a massive banner, and if you look on the TV coverage,
can you see her?
You can see it. Yeah.
Okay, same question to you, Charlotte. What have you protested about over the years?
Oh, it started young, I'm afraid. I made banners with my sister and my dad to persuade my mum to turn on the heating before Advent. She was very mean with the heating. But more recently, I've stood with the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party protesting against a no-deal Brexit outside the MP's offices in Dover. Stood with young people, climate change protests, and the Iraq War many years ago.
I mean, Julie, at the risk of interrupting the flow of this, one of the things that worries me about the piece is that we're in danger of trivialising what people are doing right now, and there are lots of people, ordinary people like you and me, who are essentially saying that enough is enough around the state of our climate and the crisis that we find ourselves in, and feel radically let down. So, it's nice to chat about, the marches that we've been on.
I don't think the film trivialised it at all. Those people were really passionate about
absolutely.
And I think marches and protests are often the disenfranchised voice that government, as you say, government are refusing to hear.
Yeah.
And that's what's so exciting about protests, the fact that they have the energy and really the passion to hold government to account.
There's going to be what we expect to be a major march in London next weekend, the People's Vote March. I think I can safely rule you out of that one, Anna, but are you two planning on going? Zoe, are you going to go on that march?
So, I and a whole number of other people will be going to show our solidarity with the hundreds of thousands of people who absolutely do not want to crash out Brexit in the way that our Prime Minister appears to be leading us.
I won't be there. I'm visiting my new baby niece, but again, standing with many friends who are going against a crash-out Brexit.
I don't think the Prime Minister wants a crash-out Brexit. I think
you've asked us to give him a bit of time and patience, so we're going to do that. We're not going to massively delve into Brexit on the programme this week.
Julia, I know we don't want to talk about the B word today particularly, but it is really interesting how in the last 3 years, just how much more engaged in politics everyone has become.
And frustrated by politicians, and angry.
Our Parliament has been looked at around the world, and the debates that have been going on and the process of going through the lobbies, lots of people have actually thought that it was quite positive.
Let's move on to our next subject, because I think you're going to have lots to say about this. Children who don't get a say in our political system, but they and their families can be profoundly affected by the decisions that politicians take. Now, in a moment, we'll look at record levels of overweight and obesity in children. But first, Shelley Phelps reports on the threat to 10 children's centres and 2 nurseries in East Sussex.
They're adorable, but raising a child is no walk in the park, and every day brings a new challenge. At Ring the Children's Centre, they're on hand to help. While babies play in the creche, mums are next door learning first aid. They're unhappy at the prospect of losing their local centre.
It gives us the opportunity to get out and meet other people in an environment that's safe, and there's going to be changing facilities, you can feed them without being judged, just a welcoming place to meet other people.
It's quite sad really, because I've just started coming, we both enjoy coming, so yeah, I'd be sad to see it go really.
It's a crying shame, absolute crying shame that local services in areas such as these are being diminished left, right and centre.
Across East Sussex, 10 of the council's 26 children's centres face closure by April 2020 unless alternative providers can be found. It's part of plans to save £2.6 million from the Early Help Services budget. It's a one-stop shop providing drop-in playgroups, postnatal support and family learning courses. All services are free. Donna McAdam is the manager.
We're very popular. We're open Monday to Friday. We average about 10 families at each session. We see mums and dads that are working, so on their days off they come and bring the children to a group. We see grandparents, we see lone single parents that are quite isolated, so a variety, all different families.
The changes could be difficult for families reliant on public transport and those living in the most remote areas. Take the high-wheeled children's centre in Ticehurst, for example. If that were to close, the closest centre would be in Crowborough.
But that's under threat too. The council says it's focusing its increasingly limited resources where they can have the most impact.
We are closing some of the children's centres, and there's no denying that fact. But if you look at the figures, the services that we provide in the children's centres, many of them will still be provided because it's just buildings we're closing. We're not actually, we're not cutting down the services.
Positive discussions with schools and other organisations to take over the running of the centres are ongoing. It's hoped a solution can be found so that playtime here can continue.
That's Shelley with our report. So if I can come to you on this, Ringwood Children's Centre, which we saw in the report there, is in Lewes District. East Sussex County Council are looking for alternative providers to help run these centres. Is this something that your council could step in and help with? Because we heard there it's really popular.
Yes, I mean, it's amazingly popular. In fact, I've been talking to a number of families and mothers who really value the kind of services that are offered out of these centres. And of course, we are actually already in conversation with various community organisations, parent groups, and also the county council. I had a conversation last week about how can we play a role that helps stop the closure of these really important. Not yet,
Okay.
but I think there's a bit of a misnomer in this report, and maybe it was the way it was edited rather than the actual story, because although it is the closure and de-designation of a number of different centres, it's also a massive reduction, and it's a 30% reduction in direct service provision to the most vulnerable people, as well as a reduction in the overall spend to a more universal service that we know radically impacts on people's health outcomes, on children's attainment, on and in times of rising child poverty, we should be really, really worried about the impact of these kind of cuts.
On the more general, rather than the specifics of this local issue, because it's quite a long way away from where you'll be campaigning, Anna, should support services like these be universal, or I mean, is that important in terms of community cohesion? Have they got to be there for everyone? Or actually in times of austerity still in local authority budgets, have they got to just be focused on those people most in need?
I think children's services are really, really critical, because if we get things right at the very beginning, then we often find that there are less expenses and less difficulties later. And Kent have got a really good story to tell on this. We've got 80 children's centres across the county of Kent, and not a single one of those has been closed. And what we've seen is that the number of children in care has reduced over the last few years, and Kent is in the bottom quartile for children in care. So our big focus on prevention and help at the beginning has an effect. But I would just say on East Sussex's behalf, they are rated outstanding for their children's services, and as the lady said, although they're moving them from those buildings, they're not cutting the actual services. And that's an important point.
Well, yeah, but it's not actually accurate, because of course they are having to cut back on key worker services and more broader services. I think just this point about in times of austerity, this is what we have to do. I would really challenge, because austerity is actually a choice. It's a set of policies.
It's not a choice for a local authority how much money they're given by government, though, and that's my point.
Well, and even within
their
that, there's a choice about how we go about as a local authority.
Let me bring Charlotte in.
Already demonstrated
let me bring Charlotte
in.
It's a good news story in Kent. Do you agree?
No,
when it comes to children's services?
Absolutely not. The centres may still be there, but the services that were provided in them are not. I know this from first-hand experience. Last year, 2018, £400,000 was cut from the breastfeeding support service in Kent. That's a service that isn't at the children's centre anymore. I have a 4-month-old. I take him in to get weighed, and half the services that were provided when I took my 7-year-old there in 2012 are no longer there. I can see it firsthand.
But Charlotte, and I totally agree with you, breastfeeding support is really, really important. But there is a superb breastfeeding support group that runs in the United Reformed Church in Canterbury, and it's in and so there are other ways of delivering these services.
Okay, I want to move on, because I mentioned obesity, and the reason I mention it is because we're talking about children and their families and how political decisions are taken or not taken. you know, amongst a group in society who don't get to vote for any of this. We have got record levels of childhood obesity. Children are leaving our primary schools at the age of 10 or 11 across East Sussex, but particularly Kent and Medway, with 1 in 5 of them not just overweight but obese. And the outgoing Chief Medical Officer, Dame Sally Davies, has come up with all these recommendations in her outgoing report. Is this a political area? Susie Orbach said fat is a feminist issue. Is it now a political issue?
It's absolutely a political issue. I mean, so we have radically changed. We have radically changed what we eat, and we radically changed what we eat because of what we subsidise as a government. So we're increasing fats, in sugars. All of that industry gets radically subsidised. So of course it's a political issue. It's also a political issue because of our planning laws. So we build houses we build essentially dormitory estates with no infrastructure, and then we wonder why people have to get in their cars to go to school.
A quick thought on this one, Charlotte.
Yeah.
What should politicians be doing about the childhood obesity crisis?
I agree, absolutely is a political issue, and we've got to treat it the way we looked at smoking 20, 30 years ago, reducing smoking from 71% to 14% through a measure of education and government policy is the way forward. And big government works.
Okay, Anna, your party's in government. What are they going to do?
Well, in 2016 we had the child obesity strategy that was published.
And it's still going up.
And then, but you say, you would criticise the government if there wasn't a strategy, and now you criticise the government if they actually have stepped in. So the Conservatives have recognised this as an issue, put a strategy in place, updated the strategy in 2018, and yes, it's about education in schools, and I agree entirely about planning. We have to have open spaces, but what about a bit of common sense? I popped into the Sainsbury's just before coming in there. At eye level, the first thing you encounter are all the sweets at the levels where the children are going
We've got to educate. It started in the children's centres. They used to run healthy cooking classes. They're gone now.
And parents do have to take some responsibility.
I think we're going to have to do a whole programme on this subject. I'm really, really enjoying your enthusiasm, but I'm very minded to take us on to our last subject. I don't know about you, but I really like voting. I even take my daughters with me every time. Now, by law, the next general election doesn't have to take place until 2022, but most people, including the guests in the studio with me, think that it's going to happen a bit sooner rather than later. So, how are we going to vote? And are you volatile? If you are, you could hold the key to the next election, according to the British Election Study, which has been looking at the way we all vote since 1964. Dr. Jonathan Mellon from the University of Manchester is a director of the British Election Study, and he joins us now from New York. Dr. Mellon, it's great to have you with us. In the simplest terms, what do you mean by voter volatility?
Well, so at the most basic level, voter volatility is just the proportion of voters who switch parties from one election to the next. And if you go back to the 1960s, only about 13% of voters were switching parties between elections. If you look at 2015, by contrast, that was up to 43%. And if you look at the three elections, 2010, 2015, and 2017, more than half of voters switched parties at least once in that time. We're a very volatile electorate at this point.
Why does it matter?
So the reason it matters is that the more volatile voters you have, the more that election results, even in places that look quite stable, can suddenly change dramatically. You can have a seat that for 30 years in a row never changed parties, but suddenly, because all these voters who are moving underneath the surface decide to move in the same direction, you get dramatic change coming out all of a sudden where you never expected it before.
So we've had voter volatility and it's been increasing. How does Brexit feed into all of this?
So Brexit has broken one of the big taboos of British politics, which is switching directly between Labour and the Conservatives. In the past, you had people switching from Labour to Lib Dems and Lib Dems to Conservatives, and in the other direction. But you very rarely had people switching directly between the major parties. Brexit changed this because the Conservatives and Labour had both Remain and Leave supporters on each side, and those supporters in 2017 suddenly found themselves without a political home and considered for the first time a party that they never normally would have, the other major party.
So let's look at how all of this plays out in constituencies in the South East. What could it mean in a general election when that comes eventually?
So I think there's some really interesting things going on in the South East. It has traditionally been quite a stable region where you have the same party winning a seat over and over again. But if you look in 2017, you had some quite big changes in somewhere like Hastings, where that was quite a safe Conservative seat. and came just within an inch of going over to Labour. And in fact, in the next election, it could be even more so, because you look at the change where UKIP had about 13% of the vote in 2015 and went down to near zero in 2017. And the Conservatives stayed about stable and Labour went up a bit. You might think that UKIP voters went to Labour, but our data suggests that actually probably what happened was UKIP voters went to the Conservatives and Conservative voters went to Labour. So there was probably twice as much switching beneath the surface than you would expect just by looking at the top line results. And this pattern plays out all over the southeast, where apparently stable things on the surface are probably reflective of a lot more volatility happening at the individual level.
Dr. Jonathan Mellon, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Mellon there is the director of the British Election Study and who's joining us from New York. Now, we didn't get into Canterbury and Dover, but an interesting example there from Hastings, which perhaps we can draw on, those undercurrents and what voters are doing, significant for all of your parties. But Anna, I wonder if this rings true to you. How volatile are voters and how do you deal with that?
I think we are going through a volatile period in politics, and I think the big Brexit debate has a lot to plays into that. But I'm not going to go there analysing the electorate. I'm just going to stick to the things that I want to deliver. I'm going to continue. I'm going to continue campaigning for that hospital. I'm going to continue lobbying ministers whenever I get the opportunity for more police and for the infrastructure improvements
you're not
that
going to
Canterbury really needs.
All of this movement.
I think that's quite arrogant. And also look at my party. We in 2017 we were 22 points ahead.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not the right attitude to sit back on your laurels.
Charlotte, do you second guess voter movement, and what do you have to do? Do you have to take this into account in your campaigning?
I don't second guess. I think that would be a fool's game at the moment. Every street throws up a different answer, or every house throws up a different answer. It's never anticipated. There's a lot of distrust or mistrust for all politicians of every party, and it's about conveying your own principles and your own honesty, I think, on the doorstep. People will vote on that in the end, how integral and how honest they feel. Well, that's going to be important.
Politicians. Okay, very quick final answer from Zoe. Do you think the Greens could be the victims of voter volatility? We've talked about the other parties there, but what about the Greens?
Well, I see it the other way around. So actually, it was really interesting to see that report, because actually voter volatility for us is a real understanding that voters are very flexible. So people, you know, chop and change according to what matters to them. And who would have thought that in Lewis, prior to the May elections, that we would have, you know, now have a Green-led a cooperative alliance cabinet and district, and across the constituency, actually for every vote cast, Greens are on top. So, you know, actually we think we're in a very strong position.
Who thinks, we've got 15 seconds left, who thinks the election is going to happen really soon?
November.
December.
Okay. Thank you all very much indeed, Zoe, Anna and Charlotte, for joining us. That's all for this week. I'm back next Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and thanks for watching.